There we go. Okay, so a year ago, not much a year ago, there was, Zoom was beginning in the world. In our world, we had begun long before that, and we were old hands at Zoom by the time Corona hit. But there was all the funny, cute stuff that was coming out. And last year, I was just going through my notes, and I happened to find this sitting around, that the Torah speaks of four kinds of people who use Zoom: the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who doesn't know how to mute. The wise person says, I'll handle the admin feature controls and chat rooms and forward the cloud recording transcripts after the call. The wicked person says, since I have unlimited duration, I schedule the meeting for 6 hours. As it says in the Haggadah, whoever prolongs the telling of the story, Harezeh Meshubach, is praiseworthy. The simple person says, hello, am I on? I can hear you, but I can't see you. The one who doesn't know how to mute says, how should I know where you put the keys? I'm stuck on a stupid Zoom call with these idiots. To the wise person, you should offer all of the Zoom Pro optional add-on plans. To the wicked person, you should say, had you been in charge, we would still be in Egypt. To the simple person, you should say, try the call-in number instead. And to the one who doesn't know how to mute, you should say, why should this night be different from all other nights? Now, the truth is, I found this very humorous a year ago. I find it hysterical now, and only because nothing's changed in a year. You would think that after we've used Zoom for a year, that something, something, we would have hopped something. Right? This is still very true. Anyway, just a cute little way to begin. The truth is, what I want to speak about tonight is really, I think. Oh, please send it. Okay, Beli Natter. I will send it to you. The only problem is I still haven't figured out how to get it from a piece of paper, from a hard copy piece of paper into an email. I'll figure it out. Okay. I want to speak about something tonight that I think can be a tremendous help, not only in your sedarim, but really, I think, a very beautiful idea, stam for ourselves, and something to focus on. There are some tidbits in here that you'll be able to use at your seder, but most importantly, it will give a good approach and a focus to Pesach and to the Pesach seder. Okay. The Mishnah in Maseches Pesachim, in Tractate Pesachim, says that Mazgulo Kosheni, it goes through all the things that you have to do in preparation for the I'm just going to mute everyone. And one of the things that we're told that we have to do, along as presenting to us the seder. So the Mishnah says, Mazgulo kos sheni, if you when you pour the second cup of wine, the kan haben shoel aviv. So here the son asks his father. V'im ein das beben, and if the son is not intelligent enough to be able to ask, so then aviv milamdei, the father teaches him how to ask and how to say Nishtana. So the Gemara says that Tanu Rabbanan, the Gemara brings a brisa and explains and says, Chacham, if you have a wise person, then bino shoelo. Then if Chacham bino, if his son is wise, then shoelo, then his son asks. V'im eno Chacham, but if the son is not wise, then ishto shoelo, then his wife can stand in the place and ask the questions. V'im lav, and if not, hu shoel la'atzmo, and if not, he asks the questions to himself. Afilu shnei talmidei chachamim sheyodin b'halachos Pesach, even two great Torah scholars that know the laws of Pesach, shoelin zelazeh, they ask each other the questions. Clearly, what the Mishnah and the Talmud are teaching us is that the questions on Pesach night are critical. Because if you would imagine that if the child doesn't know how to ask, well, then just move on. Skip section 1 and move on to skip section 2. Or say section 1, but don't worry about it. But here it says melamda, you have to teach him. And if you can't teach him, so then somebody else has to stand in this place. And even if everybody knows all the questions by heart, they could write them down and make their own seder. They're so wise, they're so knowledgeable, but nevertheless, these questions have to be asked. So the question that I want to deal with tonight is that why are these questions and the format of question and answer at the seder, why is that so critical? Why are we locked in to this method? Let's take a look at the first question that's ever asked in the Torah. And from that, we'll start to gain a tremendous insight. The Torah tells us in chapter 3, verse 1, in the book of Bereshis, "V'hanachash haya'oru mikol chayas hasada asher asa Hashem," the nachas, asher asa Hashem Elokim, the nachas was the most beguiling, was the most, was the trickiest of all of the animals that God had created. Vayomer el ha'isha, and he turns to the woman and he says to her, "Af ki omer Elokim lo sochlu mikol eitz hagan?" Did God tell you that you shouldn't eat from any tree in the garden? And Rashi says, "Va'af al pi shera oisam oichlim mishar peros." Even though the snake saw them eating from all the other fruits in the tree, from all the other fruits in the garden, he knew that clearly that wasn't God's mandate, that God didn't tell them that they shouldn't eat from any of the trees. Here ba'aleh dvarim, he spoke to her, he got her engaged in a conversation, kidei shetishivenu v'yavo ledaber ba'oso ha'etz, so that they could engage in a conversation about that tree. Because what the snake wanted to do was he wanted to confuse Chava. And he asked her a question, which she then had to answer and say, no, God didn't say we shouldn't eat from any of the trees. He only told us that we shouldn't eat from one tree in the garden. And that the whole purpose of the question that the Nachash asked Chava was to bring confusion into the world. And that prompted God's 4 questions. That God turns to Adam and to Chava after the snake asks his question, and God turns to them. And question number 1, which we'll come back to later, but question number 1, God says to them, "Vayikra Hashem Elokim ala Adam vayomer lo," and he says to him, "Ayeka, where are you?" Vayomer es kolcha. So Adam answers him back, and then God looks at him and says, "Mi higid lecha ki yeru mata." Who told you you were naked? Question number 3, from the very tree I told you not to eat from, you ate from that tree? And then God turns to the woman and he says to her, "Mazos asisa." So the one question that was asked by the snake prompted God's 4 questions to humanity. See, what was the world before the sin? The world before the sin was a world that was free of questions. There were no doubts. There were no uncertainties. Everything was clear. God put us in the garden, go to the La'avda U'Lashamra, to work it and to guard it, to live in the garden, to eat from the trees, to enjoy all the beauty. The world was crystal clear and perfect. And then came along the snake and he turned the world upside down because he presented Chava with a seemingly simple question. But in truth, that question was laced with cynicism. It was laced with disdain. It was laced with taunting. But she failed to see the trap. And because she failed to see the trap and she engaged in conversation, the rest is history. Death was brought into the world because of that act, because of that eating. Koitz vidardar tatzmiachlach. That now, when you planted things in the ground, there were going to be thorns and thistles that were going to grow. Bezeas hapecha toichal lechem, by the sweat of your brow, now you're going to eat your bread. Giving birth was going to be a painful, difficult experience. They're going to get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. But the worst effect of that sin, the worst effect of that action, was that the earth became filled with questions and uncertainty. that now doubt was brought into the world and confusion was brought into the world, which led to heresy, which led to denial of God, all because of that first question that was brought into the world that introduced doubt and confusion. This confusion, this questioning of God and the presence of God, this didn't just stop there. 10 generations later, it manifested itself in the Dor HaMabul, in the generation of the flood. Thought that they could build a tower and fight with God because they didn't see God, because they were confused about God's presence. Paroh, who turns to Moshe and he says to him, and the Zohar calls Paroh the Nachash. He calls him the snake. He's the embodiment of the snake from the Garden of Eden. And he acts like the snake, and he turns to Moshe and he says to him, Mi Hashem asher eshma b'kolo. Who is God that I should listen to him? Lishloach es Yisrael, to send out the Jewish people. V'lo yodati es Hashem. Where is God? I don't know him. I don't see him. He's not manifest in my life. Even Amalek, the Amalekites, who the Zohar also calls a manifestation of the Nachash. The Torah tells us that Vayikra Shem HaMakom Masa Meriva, the name of that place was called Masa Umeriva. Al Riv B'nei Yisrael, because of the battle of the Jewish people. V'al Nasosam Es Hashem, and the fact that they tested God. And how did they test God? Lamor saying, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im ayin? Is God with us or not? And you know what the very next words in the Torah are? Vayavai Amalek. Amalek comes to attack the Jewish people. Because the minute that they started to question the existence of God, they started to question if God was with them, that's when Amalek was able to attack. Rashi says amazing. Rashi says that Somach Parsha Zu, this Parsha, the story of Amalek, was connected to the previous story to tell us that God is always with us. When we ask the question, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu imayin, when we start to question that, when we're filled with confusion, with the confusion of the Nachash, the confusion of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, when we're confused, when we question, then God says, Chayechem shakelev ba v'no shecheschem, that the dog is going to come and he's going to bite you. V'atem tzeikim li, you're going to scream out to me, v'teidun hechan ani, you're going to know exactly where I am. You're going to know what side your bread is buttered on. It's like a person, Rashi gives an example, who puts his child on his shoulders and they go out and the father is carrying the son on his shoulders. And whenever the son sees something, he says, Daddy, can you pick that up for me? Daddy, can you get that for me? And he does it a second time and he does it a third time. And then they meet a person and the person says, that the guy says that the child on the shoulders says to that person, Roisa es Abba, have you seen my father? Amalek Aviv, his father says to him, you don't know where I am? The father takes him off his shoulders, he puts him down on the ground, and a snake comes and bites him. And that's what happens to us. All of this is because of the first question that was asked. Because of the first question of Nachash, the first question of the snake. And that question plunged us into darkness. And now, the only way to counteract the effects of the Nachash is to cast doubt on the doubts, is to cast doubt on the questions, is to look at those questions and to dissect them and to deal with them and to unpack them so that we can give them an answer. You know, the famous Jewish thing, people always say, why do Jews answer questions with a question? So we joke around about it and we say, why does that bother you? Right? Or some other kind of silly question to sort of show that. But it's not a silly question. You know why Jews ask a question with a question? Because that is what our lives is all about. Because now, since that very first question, we need to question the question. We need to look at the question and to wonder, what is that really? Does that really make sense? You know, the Torah tells us an amazing thing. The Torah says, Ki yipoli mimcha davar. When things are going to be confusing to you. Now, this pasuk that I'm reading you now, this verse is really about going to the courts and going to the legal system. And then when you have difficulties in Jewish law, you have to go into the legal system. But if you look at this pasuk carefully, what it's telling us is something amazing. Ki yipoli mimcha davar. When there are doubts in life, when the questions are huge. Bein dam ledam, bein din ledin. When there's Jewish blood flowing in the streets and it's difficult to understand it, bein din ledin, when it seems that God's justice, his attribute of justice is raging through the world, bein negel and negel, when there's one blight after another, when there are painful moments in life, divrei rivos bisharecha, and the Jewish people are engaged in battles with each other, when there is no shalom and there is no peace in our borders and our boundaries, V'kamta v'alisa el hamakom, you will get up and you will go to the place asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha bo, the place that God chooses to put his name, and that is to Jerusalem. And you will go up there and you will question and you will ask and you will adjudicate and you will clarify. And you'll be able to find your answers. Not just by living with doubt, not just by asking your questions, but by questioning the questions. When you confront the doubt, you can clarify it. When you confront the question, why is this happening to us? Taka, why are we living this way? Whether we have the full answer or not is immaterial, but when you confront it and you don't accept it, that's when you can start to make sense of the things around us. The doubt that was brought into the world because of the nachash, because of the snake, that God responded with his 4 questions. Those questions, when we confront them, when we open them, when we look at them, that's when we can start to make clarity in the world. But still, why Pesach night? Why do we need to do this dafka on Pesach night? Why not just today, tomorrow? Why not every day? Why not Rosh Hashanah? Why not Yom Kippur? Why is it specifically on Pesach night that we're so focused on these questions? And why are we focused on 4 questions? Why is the whole night built around that number 4? 4 questions, 4 sons, 4 cups of wine, 4 languages of redemption. Why is that the structure of Pesach night? After the chet, the sin of Adam Harishon, of the first man needed to be rebuilt. He needed to be torn down. The whole structure that God had created now needed to be reworked. He needed to be put into a different place because of his situation, because of who he had become. Adam Harishon, Kodem Ached, Adam Harishon before the sin was not the same as Adam Harishon after the sin. You know, there was never going to be death in the world. No one was going to die. But once Adam ate from the tree, now death had to be brought into the world. Now man had to live by the sweat of his brow. Now the human being had to live in a different kind of existence. The Garden of Eden was no longer an appropriate place for him to continue living. And therefore he had to be moved to another place. He had to be taken out of Gan Eden, out of the Garden of Eden. And he had to be put into the world. And when he was put into the world, he needed to be rebuilt. And how does God rebuild him? So God comes along after the chet, after the sin, and he asks him 4 questions. And those 4 questions are the 4 stages of the rebuilding and the reshaping of the human being. God comes along to him and he asks him these questions. And like God asked him these questions, we also ask 4 questions, because we too need to be rebuilt. Because Pesach night, we hearken back to that moment of the birth of the rebuilding of the Jewish nation, of the shaping and the forming of the Jewish nation. And just like Adam had to go through 4 stages, we also have to go through 4 stages. And especially in Gullus, in exile, every year when we come back to that moment of birth, every year on Pesach night, what you're experiencing on Pesach night is a rebuilding of the Jewish people. It's a rebuilding of every person's connection to the nation. It's a rebuilding every person's connection to the Jewish people, to God, to their family. You know, we say the word magid, the section of the Haggadah. Magid means la'agid, to tell over. But magid also means la'aged. It means to tie together. And on Pesach night, we are tying together, we are binding our children to us to our past, us to our future, our entire family, our entire seder table. We're binding it to the Jewish people and ultimately binding it to God. And therefore, what's happening is that we are rebuilding ourselves each and every year. We say in the Seder, Chayav Adam Liras Hasatzmo, every person is obligated to see themselves, Kilu Yotzim Mitzrayim, as if they left Egypt. Every person has an obligation to rebuild themselves, to see themselves as if they're standing on that first night when we were standing before we left Egypt. And what we were engaging in then in that first Seder was a rebuilding of the human being. And that's why we look at the 4 questions that God asked Adam, and we understand the 4 questions that we ask at the Seder. God turns to Adam and he says to him, Ayeka. He says to him, where are you? Stupid question number 101. God, that's why you're God. You know exactly where he is. He's the dude hanging under the tree. It's not like there were a lot of people like, where's Waldo? Where's Adam? God, you knew exactly where he was. He's hanging out, hiding under the tree, thinking he can get away from you. So what was that question, Ayeka? Because what God was asking Adam was, where are you? What's happened to you? How could you have let yourself fall down like this? You have such amazing potential, such incredible capabilities. You've been given so much. And this is what you're doing to yourself. This is what you're letting happen to yourself. And on that night that we're building up the Jewish people, we turn to man and we say, Ma Nishtana halayla hazeh. We say, what has happened to you in this galus? Shebechol haleilos, in every galus and in every exile, you've eaten chametz and matzah. In every exile, you've eaten from the chametz, which is a representative of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Because chametz is a symbol of struggle, it's a symbol of strife inside of a human being. It's the Yetzer Hara, it's the evil inclination. Matzah is something that's just simple. It's a simple bread. Flour and water, it doesn't rise, it does nothing. It's just simple and flat. It represents the Yetzer HaTov, the good inclination. Shebechol haleilos, in all other exiles, you were a mixture of the Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer HaTov. But a laila zeh, but this exile, kulay matzah, euphemistically speaking, you're all yetzer hara, you're all evil inclination. What did you do with your potential? Ayeka, what happened to you? Eicha, like we say on Tisha B'Av night. Same word, different vowelization. But where are you? What's happened to you? Halayla hazeh, this gullus, how could you have broken yourself down so far that you're just yetzer hara, you're all temptations, you're all evil inclination? Then God turns to man and he says to him, Mi higid l'cha, who told you that you were arum? Who told you that you were naked? What makes you feel so naked? Who made you feel that without the Eitz Hadas, that without the tree of knowledge, you have nothing? Who convinced you that the one thing that you couldn't eat was what you needed to focus on and feel that you had nothing because you focused on that one thing? On that one material thing that I told you, don't eat from that tree, and that became the center focus of your existence? Who told you that if you don't have that, you're naked? And we turn to the Jewish people and we say to him, why are you stuck? Why are you stuck in this gullus? In every other gullus, you had shayurakais. In every other gullus, you had simplicity. You had simple vegetables. You had histapkus. You were happy with what you had. You were a sameach bechelkai. But a laila hazeh, but this gullus, kulei maror, it's all bitterness. Your obsession with money and your obsession with material possessions has made you so bitter. Stop worrying about your possessions. Just like God turned to Adam and he said to him, Adam, you're broken. You need to be rebuilt. Stop focusing on what you don't have. Focus on what you have and say, thank you, Hashem. We turn to ourselves at the seder and we say, why are we still in this gullus? Why do we still need to be rebuilt? Because we need to stop focusing on our material things and what we think we don't have and recognize the awesome brachos, recognize the awesome blessings and say, thank you, Hashem. And then God turns to Adam and he says to Adam, from the tree that I told you not to eat from, did you eat from that tree? God says to Adam, he says, you're broken. Why are you so focused on physical pleasure? Why are you so focused on your guf? Why are you so focused on your body and of pleasing your body? And then we turn to the Jewish people, we turn to ourselves on Pesach night. And we say we're broken. And we remind him, in every other gullus, in all the years of our existence, ein onomat bilin, we haven't dipped even once. We're not so much into pleasure, but alayla zesh yomim. But tonight it's double the pleasure. This exile, this gullus, we're so focused on our pleasure. We're so focused on our happiness. We're so focused on the things that bring us pleasure. God turned to Adam and he told him, you're broken. And this is the way you have to rebuild yourself. Stop focusing on your physical existence. Worry about your spirit. And as we're rebuilding ourselves at the Seder, we remind ourselves, Shebechol Aleilos, we've become broken during this gullus because we're so focused on our bodies and we're not focused on our spirit. And then God turns to the woman and he says to her, Ma zois asis. He says to her, what did you do? How could you not have had a concern for Adam's welfare? How could you not have focused on if you're going to eat from the tree, you're going to bring that man down? That if you do something wrong, somebody else is going to suffer from that. How did you only focus on you and not think about another person? And we turn to the Jewish people. We turn to ourselves at the seder. And we say we're broken because we're focused only on ourselves. Shabbat Leilos in every other exile. We would eat bein yoshvin u bein mesubin. We'd go through better times, go through worse times. Sometimes we were together, sometimes we were separated. But this exile, again, euphemistically speaking, is kulon and mesubin. It is all about ourselves. It is all about focusing on ourselves. It's all about separation. It's all about living alone. It's all about not connecting to others. It's all about not worrying about other people. And at the Pesach Seder, we remind ourselves that just like God asked 4 questions to rebuild Adam, we have to ask ourselves 4 questions to rebuild ourselves. The holiday is called Pesach. Pesach, the mouth that talks. By asking ourselves these questions like God asked in building Adam, so then we have the opportunity to rebuild man. And if you look further in the Haggadah, these are the 4 questions of my beautiful children. The Chacham turns to me and he says, what are all these laws? Ma edus v'chukim. What are these laws and these statutes and all these things that you're doing? Because it doesn't make sense to him. Nothing in life makes sense to him. He's confused. He's a Chacham because he wants to know the answer. But at the end of the day, that first question that was asked by the Nachash is plaguing him also. He also doesn't get it. And he also doesn't understand what's going on. And to the Chacham, we turn to him and we say, Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikomen. That you don't eat anything after the afikomen. That means that sometimes you have to go to bed with the taste of the afikomen representing questions that we ask, representing all of the things that we wonder about, all of the things that plague us, that are inside of our minds, things that are difficult for us to wrap our heads around. Sometimes you just have to go to sleep with a question. Sometimes you're not going to get the answer. And then we turn to the Rasha. And the Rasha too is broken and needs to be rebuilt. Because the Rasha struggles with the questions of life. The Rasha looks at it and he says, Ma avoda zos lachem, what are you people doing? Lachem v'lo lo. He says, you people, not himself. Because he can't imagine, does God really care about every one of us? Does he really care about what we do? Does it really mean anything, all the things we're doing? Ma avoda zos lachem. What is this? What is the point? So we look at him and we say, for this, that's why God did this to me. That's why God took me out of Mitzrayim. What do you mean for this? For the questions. Davka, because of the struggle, that's why God took us out. The 4/5 of the Jewish people that never left Egypt didn't leave Egypt because they didn't struggle. And therefore they were gone, they were finished, they were done. But those that struggle, those are the ones that are still alive. The Russia might be a Russia because he's allowed himself to do ridiculous things, but the fact that he's still questioning means that he's not dead yet. Because he's still struggling. And you tell him, Tatala, struggle. But don't just ask the questions. question the questions, and through that you'll find the answers. And then we turn to the Tam. The Tam says, Ma Zois. What's going on? Why are good things happening to bad people? Why does the world operate the way it does? And we turn to him and we say, B'chayzek Yad. We turn to him and we say, with a strong hand, God took us out of Egypt. We tell him it's got nothing to do with you. It's got nothing to do with your actions. Ultimately, it's all coming from the Yad Hashem. It's coming from the Chozek Yad Hotzianu Hashem in Mitzrayim, with that strong hand that God took us out of Egypt. And then we turn to that She'enu Yodei Lishol, the one who doesn't even know how to open his mouth because he's so trapped and so filled with pain from the vicissitudes of Gullus. He can't stand to hear about another bomb, and he can't stand to hear about another missile, and he can't stand to hear about another tragedy. Ein lo pelo hashiv, he doesn't have a mouth to open. Man noimar, what could we say? Man nedaber, man nitztadak. He has no idea even where to begin. So to him we turn. Actually, his mother turns to him, because the Haggadah tells us, At petachlo. Not ato, you the man, but at, you the woman. Because there are no words, there's no script, just at, the warmth of his mother. Psachlo, you'll open him up. You'll cry with him. You'll feel with him. And it'll answer nothing, but it'll give him the strength to continue. And you'll say to him, Ba'avur zeh, for this, because we knew we weren't alone. That's why God took us out of Mitzrayim. That's why God took us out of Egypt. These are the 4 exiles, the 4 ways that we're broken, that every single Jew experiences. The feelings of meaninglessness, the inability to be able to feel and experience hashkacha, God's divine providence, the lack of understanding of how God runs his world, the lack of understanding of divine justice, and the questions that could break us just from the sheer pain of everything we see. And we all go through these. It's part of our journey. It's part of our growth. The Haggadah tells us, Kineged arba banim dibra Torah, that corresponding to the 4 children the Torah talks. But as we say in another place, al tikri bonim ela bonim. Don't read it as children, but rather as bonim, as builders. Kineged arba bonim dibra Torah. The Torah talks to us about 4 ways to build ourselves. When that first question tore us down, God asked us 4 questions and he said, look at yourself, build yourself back up. And it's those 4 questions that we ask at the seder to build ourselves back up. And it's those 4 aspects of us, the Chacham, the Rasha, the Tam, the She'enu Yodei Lishol, that need to be addressed and need to be built. When we ask the question and we're open to the answer, that's when we grow beyond that which weighs us down. And that's when we can start to experience a geula, a redemption. When we resolve our Chacham's dilemma, and we understand how sweet is Hashem's Torah, then we've experienced the first stage of redemption. V'haitzesi, says God, I will take you out of Egypt. When we resolve the Russia's dilemma, when we accept in ourselves the notion of Ashkacha, when we recognize that there is divine providence in this world, when we're focused not on ourselves, but we're focused on something larger than us, we're focused not on our bodies, but on our spirits, then we've experienced the second stage of rebuilding, the second stage of redemption, the second cup of wine, the hitzalti, and I saved you. When we resolve our Tam's dilemma, our simple son's dilemma, and we accept that the plan lies with God, then we've reached the third stage of redemption, the third cup of wine. Vigo'alti eschem, and I've redeemed you. And when we cure our inability to ask because we're overwhelmed with the sense of aloneness and loss, then we've experienced the fourth rebuilding of the human being of the Jewish people. And we've reached the fourth level of redemption. Vilokachti. That God says, I will take you to me as a nation. And together, vehivesi, I will bring you into the land of Israel. 4 questions, 4 steps of building, 4 answers, 4 levels of redemption. And that's why questions and answers are so critical on Pesach night. Because it's not just about the question and the answer, but it's about rebuilding ourselves. By asking ourselves the questions. If there's nobody there to ask the question, then I need to confront that question. I need to look into that question, and I need to ask that question myself. Because by asking it, by dissecting it, by taking it apart, so then that's where I'll be ready to be able to grab that which God has in store for me. And where does it all end? When God brings us into that land as a rebuilt people, as rebuilt human beings, that we can appreciate and recognize and feel the need to connect to God and to his oneness. Chayav Adam Liros Esatzmo. Every person, we say in the Haggadah, has to see themselves as if they left Egypt. Every person at the seder has to see themselves as if they have rebuilt themselves. And by rebuilding themselves, they've reconnected with everyone around them, reconnected with their history, reconnected with their future, reconnected with their people. And that's the objective of Seder night. Magid, La'agid, to draw us all together, to rebuild us as a nation. Just some thoughts for Pesach. Something hopefully that we can grab onto and question it ourselves. And through questioning it, flesh it out, smooth it out, and use it as a tool at the Seder to make it more than just a macaroon fest, but to turn it into the moment that it is meant to be, which is a moment of rebuilding and reshaping our vision and our view and our connection to the Jewish people, our connection to our families, and our connection to God. Okay. With that, I wish everyone an amazing Pesach. In Yitzhak Hashem, the lessons that we learned from last year's Pesach will be with us this year. For those that are having different kinds of storm this year, spend a moment at your Seder and think back to last year. And ask yourselves the following question. is this year's seder as beautiful as last year's? Because as difficult as last year's seder was, as hard as it was being alone, every person found some piece of beauty inside of it. Just ask the question, did I take some of that beauty from last year? And have I taken it and put it into this year's seder and found this year to be as beautiful because of the experience that I had last year? Okay, I could go on for hours. I'm gonna stop here. Everybody,
Thanks, Rabbi. Thank you.
amazing, uplifting Pesach, and we should know only from this should be our last Pesach, where we're eating alone. Okay, where we're eating alone outside the land of Israel. Next year, we should all rejoice together inside of Jerusalem, inside of the rebuilt Yerushalayim, all of us together, eating the Korban Pesach in Yerushalayim Kodesh Habenuya B'mheira V'Yomeinu. Amen.
Amen, amen, amen. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chag kosher v'sameach.
Chag kosher v'sameach.
Amen. Thank you.
We'll see you very.
Everybody should have a beautiful. So I see the Noel and the I saw your son and daughter-in-law on for a moment, but at least I saw them on Purim. So,
They loved.
I got to the house, they weren't there, but thank God before I left, I got a chance to schmooze with them for a couple of minutes, and it was beautiful.
I hope you'll see them more.
Yeah, Mirza Hashem. Everything's opening up here. It's slowly, but it's starting to open up. Now all that has to open is the airports, and then it will be fine. But Mirza Hashem, that'll all happen in its right time.
They loved your shalach manas. They
Yes,
loved
my
it.
children also.
Yeah.
My children also loved it. Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. But I did not get a chance to see your children. They were out gallivanting. But I saw the dog that I did see. He was hanging out in the window. Yeah. But Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem.
We'll be there soon.
In Mirza Hashem, I can't wait to see you. Mirza Hashem. And hopefully when whoever comes, of course, you have a place to come to. And I can say that now because, it's real. I mean, very soon, I think in the next couple of months, things are going to start, Mirza Hashem, things are going to start opening up again.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Who are you voting for, Rabbi?
Say again? Who am I voting for?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a few you don't talk about with friends. Religion and politics. and who I'm voting for is, who everybody votes for is both. So there's no way I'm talking about that. Yeah, today's big yontif. It's election day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Rabbi,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's not like it's not like nobody knows what's going to happen. We're going to be stuck in the same thing for another, till the next election. That's all. So people that think about buying like special clothing, election clothes, right? Because you're going to have to you wear them often. It's not like you only use it once every bunch of years. You use it all the time. Okay.
Yes.
Time for Daf Yomi. Okay, everybody, have a wonderful, beautiful, amazing yontif. Thank you all for coming.
Love to Shoshi. Love to Shoshi, please.
I will. Mirza Hashem. Okay, let's rock and roll.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Okay, where are we holding?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bays, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Sei
My pleasure.
gesund.
Sei gesund.
Sei gesund.
Pinchas. Chag Sameach. Yeah.
That's just a few.
Okay,
Where we're
holding on
holding
bays.
depends on which pagination you're with.
Yeah, no, Enochanami, but the one I'm using is based on
It's a
bays.
base on a base.
Yeah. Okay, so we're holding by Rabbi Yosa. the Rabbi Acha, and again, depending on the, I think Art Scroll is the same pagination as this, because this is the Vilna Shas. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, line 11, 12, 13, 14, about 15 lines up from the bottom. Rabbi Yosa v'Rab Acha. Okay.
Do you want to stop the recording and start it again?
Yes, thank you very much. That was it. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Okay, stop recording.